Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own selfish best interest to help others. Now, today we have Shajen Joy Aziz as our special guest. Cheyenne is an award-winning international best-selling author, educator, speaker, and executive producer. She has she is the author and co-creator of the international best-selling book and film Discover the Gift, It's Why We're Here, which is published in 28 countries and in over 18 languages. Welcome, Cheyenne.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can we first start? First, would you like to tell us a bit about your background and challenges that you faced that led you to do what you're doing now?
Absolutely. My background is I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a partner, and ultimately I'm an educator. So I have a master's degree in education and a master's degree in psychology. And I really believe in the combining of both of those ideas and those ways of being and those genres to really be able to live a life we love in this moment. And so that's really where I come from. When I grew up, my young life was very tumultuous and filled with a lot of adversity. And when I was 12, my mother was killed in a car accident. And about 20 days before she was killed in a car accident, our house burned to the ground. And about a short amount of time before that, her and my stepfather, who I'd grown up with my entire life up until then, broke up. So in a very short amount of time, my brother and I lost everything we knew to be true on this earth that we were deeply connected to, aside from our father and his family. And that then became my journey of discovering myself and how do I live after that. And that's really where I come from. And it's interesting because I really believe there was, for me, life before those adversities. And then there was a new life that began again after the death of my mother. And what I really understand is that I'm not alone. And we all have different ways in which we feel alone and feel that people don't see us, don't hear us, and don't value us. And I'm here to tell you it's not true. And the lesson for me began with really beginning this journey of discovering myself and finding out how to, for lack of a better word, rid myself of the pain and the anguish that I felt inside of me. And by surprise, I ended up finding an avenue. And that was really surprising for me and one I'm very grateful for. And that's educating children and being in the space with those young ones who have experienced trauma. And it was in the giving to them that my healing began. So that's really who I am, and that's where I come from.
All right, wow. You talked about the feeling that you felt alone and that you're not alone. I mean, that would be a common experience, I would say almost everyone has had at some point in their life. When you say that you're not alone, what do you mean by that? And how does someone who is feeling alone take that step out to not feel alone?
That's such a great question. One of the hardest things is to take that first step. And before you can even take that first step to realizing you're not alone is to actually be in your aloneness, right? To really feel into it, not in a dark way, but in a way of feeling yourself. And the process of not being alone for me began in service. And that's really the best way for me to share that. Meditation and other things came later. Connecting energetically came later. First, for me, what I discovered was that I healed quicker and felt less alone when I gave to others. So it's the giving of that gift, the giving of yourself, the giving to the places where you feel wounded, where you feel hurt. It's the sharing of yourself. What I didn't know, which was such a beautiful surprise for me, I alluded to it a little bit in my introduction, is when I was 18 and I went to college. Now, I want to back up for a minute. I want everyone who's hearing this and for you to know that life can be so confusing and hard at times that you just don't know what direction to go. I quit high school when I was 15 because I could not manage what our schools were asking of me psychologically, because emotionally I was so distraught and alone and felt like no one cared and understood what I was feeling inside. So I quit high school and I got a full-time job. And then I got my GED in the United States and got great scores so I could get into any college, basically, except for an Ivy League that I chose. And I chose a very tiny little liberal arts college in the middle of the woods, super small, Goddard College, bless you, and shout out to Goddard. And part of their process as an 18-year-old when I first got there is you had to do community service. So education, service, all of those things are what really brought me to not feel alone anymore. And so signing up for classes, before you could sign up for the classes you wanted, you had to sign up for community service local. So I'm looking at all these different things and I'm going, I didn't connect anything. And all of a sudden I saw community childcare. And I was like, oh, I love kids. I totally relate to that. I signed up. I had a car. You had to have a car to take that gig. So I took that gig. And on my first day, I drove into this place, and it was this big brick building in a town, a big city, a little city, but for Vermont, it was quite big. And I drove in and I was like, a little confused, walked in. They were like, oh, yay, you're here. And they handed me a book and said, here you go. And I was like, what's that? And they said, oh, it's the Nurturing Parent Program. That's what you're going to be doing with this group of kids in this other room. And I was a psychology student, but I didn't quite connect those two that I was doing that. So I was like, I've never done this. And they're like, that's okay. Just open the book and start on page 1, gather the kids, you got this. And I was like 18. And I opened the door and there was kids from 2 to about 8, filthy, not together, sad. It was like, I walked in and my stomach and my heart, and I thought, I can't do this. Like, I can't do this. And I went to walk out and something in me just said, well, turn around. Like, what are they going to do? Like, you have to, here you are. It's like, okay. So I heard myself and I turned around and I sat down with these kids for 2 hours. Yes. I didn't care about the book. I really didn't at that point. I ended up diving into it later, and I got to know them and we played and we had fun and we giggled and I read them a few stories. And by the time the 2 hours were over, this feeling of peace arose in me that I had not felt ever, that I was aware of. And definitely not since the death of my mother or since the house was gone and the life that I knew before had disappeared. And all of a sudden I had this realization that it was like, wow, the more I gave to them, the more I was with them, the lighter I felt, the better I felt, the more energy I had. And that was the moment I realized it was in the giving that I began healing. And so I couldn't wait to get there. I was supposed to be 1 day a week. I ended up doing every other day, and I stayed there for 2 years, just loving these children. And really, it was the love they gave me. And that's where I realized that we're not alone, that I'm not alone, that no one is alone, because even these children, the power of love that they had to give in the trauma they were still experiencing every day when they were going home to their parents and to caregivers that weren't loving them properly was unbelievable. It was so profound. That's how I understood that we are one.
Wow. So from you're talking about the not being alone begins in service.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, it's, if I understand it, you're saying if you feeling alone, if you just reach out and give to somebody, then that reciprocation will come back, and then all of a sudden you won't feel alone. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, we're absolutely understanding that. The giving is when you give, you receive, right? That you receive so much more than you ever could imagine. So then that giving becomes this natural, like almost selfish desire because the healing and the peace grows so much. That's what I discovered. It was a quickening. So in the giving, I received.
Yeah. So, and even from a place of hurt, because you talk in your book, even before your stepfather left, you don't mention your birth father, and I'm assuming that you taken from what you said earlier, he wasn't there at all from the very beginning. So you've had a lot of loss, and even before then, you and your brother had some fairly traumatic experience that you talked about in your book. So there's a strong place of hurt that you were coming from. How, when you walked into that room with the children, like you said, you wanted to turn around and walk away. You had this book, which probably created pressure that, oh, I've got to follow this book and do what they say, which I would imagine created this fear of failure. How did you make the decision just to turn around and then just do what, just spend time with the children? What I mean, how can someone, what can you share from that experience that might inspire someone else who's in that same sort of similar type of situation to go, hang on a minute, I can just do something. What drove you to turn around and just spend time with the children?
That's a great question. The first thing that I want to share for those who are listening and for you is follow your positive inner wisdom. Follow the positive inner wisdom. That whether it's a voice, whether those signs show up in nature, in numbers, whatever that is that gives you that positive connection to self, to understanding, ooh, this is for me, even if it might be hard. Follow your positive inner wisdom. Don't listen to the negative one. That's not for you, but the positive path is. What happened for me in that moment is I had two choices. I had a choice to turn around and leave, and I had a choice to step through my fear.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered as I look back and continue to live in the present and move forward is the more I'm willing to step through my fear, the more joy, grace, and peace I find on the other side. And it's that willingness to do that work. And sometimes it's a tiny little step, and what we're really stuck with are all the thoughts, the feelings, the why we can't, why we're not worthy, why we're not valuable, all the things that the conditioning that our life has given us as we've grown, whether it's unintentionally from our parents, from our friends, our peers, our teachers, the world around us. They give us messages every day about who we are, who we think we are. And part of the process is calming that chatter down, really getting that chatter away from your inner self so you can hear your own wisdom, your own inner pathway, and follow that guidance, that GPS. That's for you.
Right. So is it a case of having the confidence when you're feeling that fear, that knowing that giving is the safety net, that if you give, like if you're fearing something, if you're giving, the most likely outcome is that something positive will come back. Is that what you're
Yes,
suggesting?
absolutely. The more you give, the more you receive. That's really the process. If you think about it, even the gifts of our adversity, it's chapter 6 in Discover the Gift. It's one of the big boom pinnacles of the book. It's because everyone in this world, no matter where you are, who you are, what kind of life you come from, socioeconomic background, your demographic, whatever that is, we all experience adversity. And if we're willing to look for the blessing in disguise, look for the gift that might be there, that's that positive inner wisdom. That's the mindset shift. It's what happens is our mind naturally will go in a loop if we allow it. So if we stay in the negative and we don't intercede that loop, it's going to continue. And if we learn to practice the positive, that's really when people saying, "Oh, focus on the positive and everything will be okay." Well, that's actually not true. However, what will be okay more and more is your ability to manage when adversity and obstacles and things come your way. That's the difference. It's not some magic trick that makes life perfect. And I really don't want people to believe it because of that, because that's not true. Just think positive and everything will be okay. Or people often say you called this to yourself so you could learn a lesson. I also don't believe that. I believe lessons show up and it's our job to figure out our responsibility to ourselves and others in those lessons. So I want people to be really clear that you didn't cause that adversity necessarily. It's not your fault. As grown-ups, it is our job and our responsibility to manage our trauma, our anger, our upset, and find positive ways to shift it in ourselves and for others. That is something I do believe.
Yeah, because that's interesting. You talk about, again, in the book at the beginning, that you and your brother, and it was definitely in the movie as well, you and your brother, you got to a place, like, I mean, you obviously had some trauma, then a lot of things left your life. And you mentioned, I think Damien mentioned in the movie that, if you were, that you both were, you mentioned, I think, that you didn't want to talk to your brother at all.
Yeah.
And he mentioned, like, if you were in the same room together, you probably would have had a big screaming match and that kind of thing. I mean, and I want to sort of understand a bit how you got to that, because and then how you moved through that, because it's one thing to go, oh yes, as you mentioned before, it's the case of going, oh, everything's great, find the positive in that. But people going through real trauma for them, it's really deep, and that must have been really traumatic to have. You've lost your birth father, you've lost your stepfather, you've lost your mother, and then Damien went off and left as well. Your brother has left. You've lost your nice house. Um, that must have been really, really emotionally draining for you and really traumatic. How does someone work through that and then, like you say, find that way through that? And we have talked about service, but if you're really going through that, how does someone go, okay, yeah, it's fine for someone to say, yep, be positive, but when you're really experiencing that, what can you do to turn that around?
The first thing I want to say is breathe. Remember to breathe. Um, what happens when we don't breathe is that we get stuck in fight or flight in amygdala hijack, and our brain actually gets stuck and is not able to access our prefrontal cortex. So the science of it and the physiology of it, of breathing, actually begins to allow better thinking, better processing, a calming of the heart and of your system. And so the first thing I want to say is breathe. When you're in a dark place, remember to breathe. And if you can, I would say it's in through the nose and out through the mouth. And there's a reason for that. However, just experience it. And so that to me is step number one, because what we have in this life is breath. Number two, and don't laugh at me with this, everyone who's listening, is focus on gratitude for a moment. You see, what happens when we focus on gratitude is we can't focus on the upset. So it actually gets us out of the dark, the despair, the upset, the confusion, even if just for a brief moment, and you get that pit of light in you. When you focus on gratitude, you start to realize, wow, it's actually, things are going to be okay. That little tiny bit of gratitude seeps in and it starts multiplying everywhere. And if you can find moments of breath, awareness breath, like real focused, aware breath. And gratitude every day, even if for a moment, that time will grow. And you'll start noticing little places in you where you're being like, oh, I just noticed I was grateful for something, even though I feel really bad and dark. And so, breath and gratitude are two of the things I've really discovered in my own experience that help me when I am alone in dark places. And even if I'm grateful for the chair I'm sitting in, the coffee I'm drinking, the mug I have. I want to share something. This is actually interesting for people that might surprise everyone. I don't share this very often at all, actually. And I'm not sure I've shared it out loud yet on a podcast or an interview. So after we created Discover the Gift, life is filled with ups and downs, right? And somehow in the midst of all the stuff, I ended up, because I'm a giver, not paying enough attention to some of my contracts. And this was one of my big lessons many years ago, and how I now can say I'm a good businesswoman. And back then I was terrible. I was always a teacher. I didn't think business when I was creating this at all, or co-creating it. And all of a sudden I had no money. I had just created this global film. My book is published all over the world. And I find myself with a 5-year-old, well, it's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. She was 9 at that time, 9-year-old with no money. And being like trying to figure out how to live in Los Angeles, make my world work. And it was dark. It was a really dark place. And I'm thinking, wow, I feel so not connected to what's really true of me and my work in the world at the moment and who I am. And what do I do? And my voice said, honor the gifts of your adversity, woman. And I was like, oh, I hear that. Okay, I'm going to do that. And what showed up for me was I needed to move back to Vermont. I have a beautiful home in Vermont. I have a life that's immediate for me to step into. It wasn't going to cost me everything I needed. All I had to do was get myself and my kid back across the country. And so I did. And for half a year, I drove around in a Trailblazer. That guy, I love that Trailblazer, that had no lights. Unless I was holding the high beams on, then we could drive at night. But that's where I was. And I had to rebuild, right? Yeah. And it was in the rebuilding that I found joy again and discovered myself again and found my energy again. And I never stopped doing my work. However, what people didn't know is that I was having to rebuild life again for myself and my kid, financially and from the ground up. And so again, it's honoring the gifts of your adversities and making choices. Now, this sounds like it's really easy, and I know it's not easy. Okay, that shift of the mindset to make a different choice for yourself. And what I want to say to people is try it on. You have no thing to lose by making a choice that's for you. And when I made the choice that was for me, everything, and I mean everything, just started falling into place in a way that I couldn't have imagined before. I stopped working so hard. I was working hard, but I stopped working so hard, right? And things just started flowing. And I started being in the allowing rather than in the getting. And when I got to presence and being, I really discovered the gift and understood my own work in a new way. I had to go back through adversity myself to get it, which was fascinating. And that began a whole new journey again, and one I'm very grateful for.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's quite amazing. Because you had to, like, you had all this success and then you've lost it and had to rebuild again and discover that adversity.
So interesting. I didn't lose the success. Success is very different for people. Interesting. Success is not money for me. It never has been. That's the mindset shift, right? So I always felt my success. I just was trying to figure out, how do I make ends meet on the day-to-day to have the life I want to live? Yes. That was the difference, yes.
Yeah. Well, and that's an important part, though, because in life, and it's one of the principles of share.care is, or the underlying principles is money, to give yourself that security. Because I could imagine as a mother with a child, you must be thinking about, how am I going to take care of my child and support them? And that's got to be a worry, which is why money is one of the principles in providing security for a family. Um,
Very much so.
yeah.
Essential.
And I mean, the 2 points that you talked about, breath and gratitude, and um, with those, I want to make the leap because you talked about with your brother that you both were suffering, and you had this relationship where it was a lot of animosity, but the disconnect was actually a powerful connection. If I've got those words right, which I think you wrote in your book,
Yeah.
um, and how much of that becomes habit, and then when we're changing from that, it's a matter of going through the process of changing our habitual behaviors. Was that your experience? What are the steps that someone could go through to actually take, like you say, it can be difficult. It's not easy in that first part because I imagine you and your brother, as much as you had that animosity in your relationship, there was also still an underlying love that drew you together. And through that
Yeah.
animosity is maybe a way it was connected. And if I understand what you wrote in your book correctly, then that becomes a habit, how we relate. What can we do to trigger ourselves, and what are the steps we can take to have that perseverance to keep moving forward? Or what did you and your brother do to rekindle that?
The first thing we did in the first step is we had to be open and we had to be receptive to that which we truly wanted. And again, I'm chat about conditioning for a moment. Often society and our life experiences make us think we want something different than what's really true for us.
Yeah.
So part of this process in general is getting really real and honest with yourself and with
Mm.
ourselves about what do we really desire. For me, it was always family because I always felt alone.
Yeah.
And so for me, family was my desire. And the process um, is being willing to do the work and take the steps that you need to really discover yourself. You see, we think it's so out there, and it's really about discovering yourself. Who are you really? What really lights you up and inspires you? What really drives you? What do you want to do when you have nothing else to do? You have no social media, no anything, no electronics. What do you do with your time? Do you read? Do you draw? Do you walk? Do you hike? What do you do? Do you exercise? Do you dance? I don't know. Do you make food? Are you naturally drawn to? And I think that's really the process of connecting deeply with others. So I want to start with that as first deep connection with self. And the process we really had to take was being open and receptive. And what came out of Discover the Gift and our process was something I call the 4 I's, which is insight, intention, integrity, and involvement. And if you put a big circle around all of those, you have integration. And so it's about really listening deeply to your insight, getting clear about your intentions, having integrity with your word and your actions. People miss this part in understanding the law of attraction or manifesting abundance or doing what you want. It's not sitting back and putting your feet up and being the genie and just thinking good thoughts.
I'm
It's
showing my
actually
age by
having
laughing at that because I used to watch Age Magazine.
it's really following through with your insight, having really clear intention, having integrity, and being involved, right? You have to have integrity with yourself, with your word, with your actions. That's really how my brother and I reconnected, was we both decided that was most important, and we had to take the same steps together to do our own inner work so that we could have our interpersonal relationship back, and thus the creation of Discover the Gift.
Yeah. Wow. And you and your brother talk about how, you weren't talking to each other. And he rang up, he went through some process where he said part of him died. And that was the part that held that animosity. I'm paraphrasing there, that not, but words to that effect. And your step was to forgive him so that you could have that relationship. And so that you were both in that position where you were going through those 5 eyes that you were talking about. For someone where they want that and the other person is not ready for that yet, what advice would you give someone in that position, where they're really hurting? Like, imagine, that, well, I'm putting the shoe on the other foot here. Damien rings up and says, "I'm sorry," and you say, "I don't want to talk to him." What would someone like Damien, in that position, would he do, or how would he do with that from discover the gift perspective? Is what's in that animosity, or what could they do? Um, go
If
to
that door is not open for them to step through to begin the process of healing, that
exactly, yeah,
that they do not stop healing themselves.
right,
There is no other answer I have except that's so I started with it's that work we do here first. Because when we do that work, what happens is we understand then that someone else might not be ready yet.
yeah,
When we honestly do that work for ourselves, we can have compassion and see, wow, they're not ready, and that's okay. And ow, it
yes,
hurts. Ow, I don't like it. Ow, it's uncomfortable. And I have compassion because I've been there
yeah,
and I understand what it's like to be closed like that. And I would offer, so honestly, this question has come to me from many people from all over the world. And the first thing I say is offer the movie Discover the Gift.
yeah,
And for real, offer the movie. Say, hey, I want to share a link with you, or come over and let's sit down and watch this together and let's take some breaks. And one of the things I want to share with people is be prepared to pause it, to have discussion, for those that want to really dive in, that tool is there for you and those that want to dive in together. For those that don't think that other person or people are ready yet, offer them a link and say, hey, I'd love if you take a moment when you're ready, just take a peek at this and see what you think. It, it changed me. Maybe there's something in there for you. Something simple, but you don't make them wrong for not wanting to be there. You don't make them wrong for not wanting to shift like you've shifted, right? It's that we have to be solid in ourselves and have compassion for others. And to me, do no harm comes up. Like, do our best to do no harm to ourselves and those around us. And I think that's really important.
wow, that's a really, I think, and from having watched the movie, and be honest here, when I first saw a little bit of the trailer, I was like, oh yeah, another, I've seen a lot of self-help type movies and stuff like that. But I must say, I put it on, and I initially put it on while I was doing some exercise, because I thought, oh, I'll go and watch something while I'm doing some exercise. I'll get this over with. And it was so compelling. So for someone, you know, going through that process, and to sit down with someone that you might be reaching out at, as Cheyenne has said, I would highly recommend that. It will be compelling. Like, once you start watching it, all of a sudden it's very well made, and it's very compelling to watch. And I wasn't able to. So I finished. I had it on my computer, and I finished my exercise. The time ran out, and I picked up the computer, still watching it. Walked into the next room, and continued to watch. So it's a fabulous movie. So I would highly recommend following Cheyenne's advice there with sitting down with someone, because I don't think you'll be able to pause it. You might have to come back and, and look at bits again, because I wasn't able to stop watching it. And from that process of making that movie, you talked about, you and your brother talked about that it was living through the darkest hours that you discovered your gifts and the process. Can you talk about that? Can you explain that process as to what you went through, how those 8 principles came into being? Before we get into the 8 principles, I'm just, because that wasn't really covered in the book, and I'd like to understand what you went through and how you discovered. Was it like a divine light that came down, or how did that come
Well,
about?
that's a great question. It wasn't a divine light necessarily, although that is an interesting way. I can feel it that way. It felt like that,
Yeah,
warmth. It felt clear. So what happened is, in my darkest moments, when after my mom died, I can honestly say were my darkest moments, and nothing else compares, and may it never. Um, so what I realized is, this is going to sound so strange, maybe. I was really lucky. I had 12 years of a mom who really loved me, like really loved me. Like I felt love.
Yeah.
And I somehow inside of me knew that I was lucky because of that. And at 12, I knew that not all kids had that kind of
Yeah.
connection with their parents and relationship. And so in the dark, I felt the despair and the loss like nothing I've ever experienced since. And I still felt hope. And I could see that life wanted to live through me. It's a good way I can describe it as a little bit before my mom died. It was the summer before she died. So I was 12, and it was late summer, actually, in fall, and I was walking home from my friend's house, and we had a mile between our homes and the country road. And I was walking, and there's a little brook called Broad Brook there, and sometimes the forest would open up to a flat. There's this area that always kind of had this little flat that you could see the brook as you were walking on the road. And I walked by, and there's this log that had always been there. And all of a sudden, somehow I paused, and I really noticed the log this day. And I noticed all the moss on the log. And then I noticed, I was like, I don't know what they're called, but they're little tiny mushrooms that have a little red top, or I don't know what they are. There's some kind of little fungi that grow, and they're so tiny and cute. And I always love them. So I went to go be like, oh, I wonder if they're on there. And they were on there. So I was like, oh, there they are. And I was following them. And then I saw all the bugs on the log. And I was 12. And then I saw a squirrel run, and then on the log, and then I saw something go under in the log. And then I was like, oh, what's in the log? And in my moment, I realized this dead log had all this life growing off of it.
Yeah.
All this life was living on this log that was totally dead and kind of hollow. And inside were creatures living. There was a little hut and something. And I remember I being like, oh, I understood life. Like, oh, I really got excited, and I was like, ran home to tell my mom, like, I understand life. I understand it. And she was in the garden, almost ready to walk up to the house. And we sat down in the garden for a little bit, and the sun was starting to set. And she started to talk to me about the connection of the earth and the moon and the stars and the creatures that inhabit the earth. And I understood life and death in that moment. And
Oh, wow.
that's my best way to describe the light in the darkness, right? Is understanding that from our darkness, light can grow and beautiful things can come out of it if we're willing
Yes.
to be receptive to that possibility and to be open to a blessing in disguise. In the United States, it's now global, I believe. There's the Amber Alert system. And the Amber Alert system in the United States was for kids who were being abducted, and no one could do anything about it. And so these one parents had their little girl, Amber, was abducted, and no one could help them. And obviously that didn't work out well for them. And so their greatest adversity, they decided to be a gift to the United States, and they created what's known as the Amber Alert system. And the moment a child is abducted in the United States, all these alerts go off, and every highway you're on, every news channel, everything pops up, Amber Alert, abducted and missing child. And we've been able to recover so many children because of this one family's biggest adversity. They decided to make it a gift, and it's actually around the world now in different countries. So it can be from the micro to the macro like that, right? It can be a little thing, that gift of adversity you're doing for yourself or for others. It's in the giving, again, that we receive, and that light starts to grow.
Okay. And how do we get to and we'll go through each of these principles, the 8 principles, like why not 9 or why not 6? I mean, where did the 8 come from? Was it just like you said, you something just had that feeling that this is the right thing to have? Yeah. Okay. So the first principle is receptivity. Would you like to tell us a little bit about receptivity and how someone can experience that? And
Yeah, open and receptive. It's for those who meditate on a
Mhm.
regular basis, you know what that feels like. More than not, you have a feeling of allowing and not a feeling of contraction. So being receptive, contraction feels like this, right? And receptivity feels like this. And so it's not being contracted, is the feeling of being open. And that has to do with not only your physical body, but your mind and your spirit as well, and your heart. And so that you're being open and receptive to new possibilities, to a new idea, a new something. It's the take that first step through the fear, being open.
so receptivity is really listening, and would, for example, would someone, wanting, because normally a lot of times when we're speaking or when someone is speaking, we're thinking of the next thing to say. So we're not really listening. Is that something if someone could do as a step towards being receptive? Is that to actually listen to somebody?
I love that you said that. So what I have in front of me is actually not the book, but it's the training manual for coaches and trainers.
Yeah.
And in receptivity, what I talk about is exactly that. It's the learning to be present in your listening. So presence is really a big thing that we kind of talk about and we gloss over in the world of spirituality, transformation, and all that. However, it's the goal is being present, right? Being here and now. So to be receptive is really to be open and to be present and open. And in the hearing, what happens for most people in conversation, no matter what, is that we are listening to respond. We're listening to give the next idea, to add our 2 cents, to create that dialogue, that thing that we think we're supposed to be doing. Yet actually, that dialogue deepens in the presence of real listening. So when I'm really listening to you, you deepen because you have that feeling of the presence. And so then that dialogue that you want to share actually goes in different places because you start opening in different places when you feel that presence of someone really listening. And that right there is a practice for all of us, especially in our quick bite world that we're so used to right now, is how do we become really fully present with someone so that we can really hear what they're saying. And that right there, if you can do that for someone, you validate their very existence.
That makes a lot of sense, in the sense you are listening, and you're being open to what they're saying. How do we translate that to ourselves as well? So listening, I know from my own personal experience, a lot of decisions that I make are because, like, and as you mentioned, you just have that feeling inside that it's right. There's a lot of, it's not, just arbitrary. There is a lot of work gone behind that, but at the end, the ultimate decision is this just feel. And I know a lot of the better decisions I've made are when I've trusted that, and the ones that haven't been great is when I've I haven't trusted and done things I knew I shouldn't have, didn't feel right and didn't do it. How do we make that transition? Okay, as a step, we can go, okay, I'm going to actively listen to what that person is saying. How do we actually listen to ourselves? What can a person do to train, like, themselves to listen to themselves?
That's a great question. The first thing I want to say is to actually listen to yourself is to calm
Yeah.
the chatter of everything else that's here for you. What happens is if we just for a moment pay attention right now to our own head, we're listening to this conversation, watching it possibly, and we've got the list of my laundry, my kid, my work, my this, the dog, the dinner I'm going to cook tonight, the all of that is not really listening, right? That's not presence. That's being there. And so the beginning part of it is learning to be aware that that exists. So you can go, yeah, I see you, I hear you, and that's not what I'm doing right now. So the thing about the brain is if we don't control it, it will control us. It has to, right? It needs to function and live and survive. And so our work is to become aware of what we're thinking and then go a little deeper and become aware of why are you thinking that? Why am I thinking that? right? Notice what you're thinking. Why am I thinking that? Question your thinking. Is that thinking important right now? Is that thinking going to make a difference and help me with this next thing that's not even on my plate right now? So there's so many ways of which presence and awareness of what your own self and brain are doing brings you not only to personal development, to your own spirituality, but also to supporting others and helping others in their own process. Just that one act of awareness with the self. So that's what I would say is begin with noticing what are you thinking? And then go deeper. Why am I thinking that? And ask yourself questions. Is this what I should be thinking about right now? Right? And then actually notice how you can make your mind do what you want it to do, and notice when you don't where it is. That's the beginning. That's the first part of that process.
Right, because that's so important. Because a lot of people do what they are taught to do and what's expected of them. Like it can be from parents, can be from society, uh, and being what you talk about in the book, if I understand correctly, is finding what your purpose is, not what someone else has told you you should be doing. And is that, from that, how does a person, with that receptivity, is that being open to going, okay, what is right for me? How does a person know what's right for them?
You work with me and you do the process like the way you know what's right for you is that you have to, like an onion, you have to unpeel, you have to take those layers off. It's layers and layers of conditioning from the world around us. Some of it is who we are and who we really want to be. And other parts are when you really get down to that nugget of who am I really? Like, who really am I? What do I really want to do? When everything else is stripped away, what really brings me joy and peace and happiness, for lack of a better word. So that is what I'm going to tell a little story. I'm going to make it quick. So I was doing one of my training programs for coaches and trainers. And a very good friend of mine was like, I really want to do your program because I really want to do what you do. Like, I want to train with you. I want to travel with you. I want to do these things pre-COVID, right? This was like what she wanted to do. And I was like, that's cool. She's very studied in it. I'd never really realized that's what she wanted, but I was like, that's great. If that's what you want, take the program. We'll see how it goes. You'll be working with me X amount of time, whatever. We go through it. So she takes the program, and this program it's Discover the Gift. It's this program that I'm talking about here. But what it is it's a coaching program that you become a certified coach of, and you would run your own clients and your people through this program to really help them discover their gifts, their passions and their gifts. To me, your passions are very, very much intertwined with who you really are and with your gifts. So pay attention to your passions. That is like a number one big, no matter what. So my friend, I'm sorry, this is doing something funky, but anyway, so my friend said, I'm going to take your course. So she takes my course, and she's doing the passion test. Chris and Janet Atwood, for anyone who doesn't know about this, I really, really recommend it. The passion test is incredible, and it's out there. It's all over the world. This is being funny. Janet teaches all over the world. And so you do the passion test. I'm a passion test facilitator. It's allowed to be part of my program. It's the beginning of it. And she comes out at the end of the passion test, and at the end going, oh, I'm a little confused. And I was like, yeah, very clear. And I'm going to get to the point of this. At the end of the program, you have to declare what you've really discovered about yourself, who you are. You've gone through this whole process with a group of people you're now madly in love with. They're madly in love with you. And you declare, I am. And she steps out to declare, and she steps out and says, I am a dog trainer and breeder. I said, yes, you are. Because what does this woman love to do in her free time? Save dogs, train dogs, rescue dogs. And then she really realized she's in love with a certain breed of dog, and she's just wanted to breed them. And this is all I'd heard her talking about for about 2 years. Yeah. I'd never heard her talking about being a trainer, going and traveling, doing events, speaking to people, making, Never had I heard. So her truth was that she discovered during this process of unpeeling like an onion, taking those layers off is what was really true for her.
Yeah.
And what's really true for her was none of that, right? That's who she thought she was supposed to be based on what everyone and everything, and who, when she took all of that away, she loves her life. She lives on 9 acres. She breeds silver labs and like some other kind of bulldog, and literally is thriving and at peace and filled with joy every single day. That's what I'm talking about. She thought it was this,
Yeah.
but it was really that. And so that's the process, is being willing to do the work and allow yourself to unfold, allow the layers of that onion to get peeled away so you find that sweet, sweet spot inside that's you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's receptivity. Intention is the second step. Would you like to explain a little bit of that, please?
Yes, intention we talked about a little before, and intention is about the process of being really clear about what you want, right? It's like the surfer on a wave. If you think about, imagine the surfer, and imagine a whole bunch of surfers, right? They're all sitting in the ocean and they're waiting for their wave, that wave that is theirs to come through. Um, Not every wave is for you,
Yeah.
right? This is something that I want people to think about for a moment. Not every wave is for you. Some surfers choose one wave while others wait for that next one to come. So, what are you intending? And if your intention is pure, you get to see that wave that's for you and try it on. And then you have that integrity. You hop on that wave and you stay on your board and you ride that board with full integrity because your intention is very clear. You see, the thing about intention for me that I've discovered is that it gets muddied very easily.
Yeah.
Yes. And so keeping our intentions really pure and clean and not allowing all of those other things to get in the way of
Yeah.
our intentions. That surfer is on that board being one with the wave, one with the board, one with what's happening with pure clarity. To me, that's your intention, that you're clear and you're focused and you're seeing the shore, and that's your goal.
So how difficult is it to, like you say, as a surfer, you see these waves and you might want to catch all the waves. How do you decide which is the right wave for you?
That's the great question. In Vermont, we would say hard telling, not knowing. So you don't know necessarily. Some
Yeah.
surfers catch that wave and they crash hard.
Yeah.
Other surfers catch that biggest wave that you think that thing's going to kill them. Oh my God, oh my God. And you watch them with grace take that baby all the way, right? And so it's about trusting yourself
Yeah.
and ready presence, being really present. They can't be anywhere else but on that board with that wave surfing to have that intention be pure and make it to the shore.
And
So it's really about honoring that connection. That makes sense.
yeah, and I was just wondering, is that links back to something you mentioned earlier too, in discovering the gift in the adversity? If you take the wave, crash and burn, and it's like, well, what is the gift in that to learn from?
Right, exactly. And we would say, what is the lesson in it? Some people might say, right? And to me, the surfer is about lifelong learning. We catch many waves at different times. The trick that I've discovered is not to try to catch them all at the same time. Do that one wave you're doing right now. You know, if you're into art right now and making mandalas, have that be what you're doing, right? Because that's where that success will come for that. If you want to be a chef, have that be what you're doing right now. It doesn't mean always, it means that's where your passions are right now. Honor them. Beautiful things will grow out of that. You will step out of your loneliness when you follow your passions. That's one of the things that artists and musicians really understand. They
Yeah.
might be filled with woe sometimes because that's what drives and inspires some of their work. Yet when they're involved in their work, they're present and they're pure and they're at peace and they're in flow, right? Because they're following their passions and following their gifts. And that's where you discover you're not alone, even when you're physically alone.
So is that leading into the third step, activation, where it's like this is your intention, but then it's like, yes, now I've got to catch the wave. Is that? Can you explain
Exactly. So
activation a
you've
bit
been
more?
receptive. Yep. You've been receptive to that possibility, that wave, right? You got clear intention. Oop, look at that wave. That one's for me.
Yeah.
I'm going to hop on that. And then I'm going to have my integrity with that wave. Then I'm going to activate it, right? And I'm going to like go for it. And you're going to go for it. You know, it's doesn't mean that it's all going to be perfect. And we have this idea, and this is something I think as I've gotten older, and aged in my wisdom, for lack of a better word, is that we think it's about this goal. We think it's about this, I have this goal, I'm going to do this, right? And that the success, the good feeling, all of that will come when that goal is achieved.
Yeah.
But we don't realize that it's the journey that's the gift. It's the journey and the process that's the beautiful part of it. That says we're alive. That goal gives us a pathway to
Yeah.
live, right? It gives us a pathway to live for a while. I wanted a master's in education. So for 2 years, that was my pathway to living, and the people, the places, and the knowledge, and the failures, and all the things that happened for me on that are part of my life, right? They're part of my tool bag. And it's the same with when I want to paint, right? I'm going to paint. When I wanted a master's in psychology, I wanted to understand something more fully. So I had to dive in, and that's what I did.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I mean by we go, oh, I'm going to do a little of this and a little of that and a little of this. And that leaves us often feeling empty
Right.
when we don't dive in fully into something and really embrace the richness of what that is that we're drawn to and inspired to activate.
Okay. And does that flow into the fourth step, being infinite feedback? It's like when you're really into it, you start to notice little things that you might have missed. Is that part of that?
Exactly. So the more you give, the more you receive. It's that infinite feedback loop. It's if I'm stepping in fully to, let's say, learning to become a chef, the feedback I'm getting is going to tell me different things. It's either going to tell me, yeah, you're really diving in fully, or it's going to choppy and sort of be confusing and hard. So you're going to pay attention to that infinite feedback. What are you putting in and what are you getting back? And that helps you fine tune, actually, if we look at it more fully. However, it's pretty much the instant hit of understanding an 8. The reason I chose 8 is I was born in the 8th day, the 8th month in 1968, and I weighed 8 pounds, and it was at 8 o'clock in the morning. So 8s for me are my number, and I've always understood them very fully as that, and taken it into a deeper realm. However, it's the infinite feedback. It's that loop that what you give, you receive, and that I have found to be very true.
And can that infinite feedback extend to, like, you put yourself into it fully and you've got to a point, because you mentioned before, it's like it's what you're doing now. So there might become a point where you go, okay, I'm going to do something else now because I'm
Yes. Because I've gotten that now. Now I understand that I'm full. My curiosity is met. My desire to want that is different and it's shifted. However, it would not have shifted if I didn't go dive in there, right? It's Stuart Emery is a great teacher. He's one of our speakers in Discover the Gift. One of the things he taught us, and I don't believe I put it in that work, in that body of work, is course correction without invalidation.
right.
Like being on a sailboat. To get to here, you often have to go that way first because that's the way the wind is blowing, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to find your way to your place you wanted to go. So it's course correction without invalidation. Don't make yourself wrong because you did that. Be like, oh, look at all the things I got from that. I learned this. I made this friend. I've now got this community. Cool. Now that's part of me. And now I can go do this because now that I know that, I now know I want to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a wonderful place to be. That's transformation. That's evolution. Yours.
Wow. Yeah. How does it relate to step 5 when we could talk about vibration? Can you explain vibration for me?
Vibration, yes. We often talk about energy and matter and all these things. And I could get into some of the quantum science of it. I'm not going to, but what I'm going to say is what we've really discovered, and you can feel free to look this up and look up quantum physics and all those pieces for those that want to dive deeper into the understanding, is nothing is actually matter. Everything is energy, and everything vibrates, and everything is in its own vibrational space. And so once we start to understand that everything is energy, right? Our voice is energy. Mushrooms, they can now listen to mushrooms that have music, right? Live mushrooms. I don't know if you know about that, but you should look it up. It's really cool. They put some kind of sound things on live mushrooms and you can hear their music. It's incredible because everything is energy.
Right.
And that's the thing. Once we really start to understand that, we can become magicians of that energy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And we say abracadabra, right? And if you go back and look where that comes from, it's in Hebrew, and it's I create as I speak.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes. So everything is energy, right? And so it's really our thoughts, our words, our feelings, and even this isn't necessarily matter. It's a bunch of vibrating particles.
Yeah.
So when we understand that perspective, we get to take life very seriously and also not so seriously.
Yeah.
Right? It's a perspective thing. It's how are we seeing that?
So the energy, is it like paying attention to what you're feeling in the energy, or is it manipulating the energy, or a combination of both? I sound like I'm talking Star Wars now. It's like the Force
It's a great question.
controls me.
I love the question. So what it is perspective.
Yeah.
If that to me is the answer I have for that, it's the perspective you have on that energy. And we can talk energy in different ways. So do you ever have friends that you know, like they walk into a room and that everything and all the energy in the room shifts? They haven't said a word. They haven't done anything. All they've done is step into that room.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yes.
Right? What is that? It's energy. Whether it's a good energy or bad energy, they are brought their energy into that space. So that's the thing that I think is really essential for people to understand about energy, is that we are the magicians of it if we're aware of it, of the energy that we give off. Life is so much about how we're being at any given moment and how our beingness generates, manifests, attracts, detracts, repels, allows, right? When we're aware of our energy, we can actually start dancing with it more in life. And energy is everything, and that's the perspective. So I want people to understand. You know the plate spinners, guys that spin plates on their fingers? You want to play for a minute with me? So pretend you're a plate spinner. So do this with me. Point your finger up, and you're going to look up like the flat plate and go clockwise. Spin that plate clockwise, just like this. Really clockwise. And it's going, that plate's going. Keep that plate going and bring it down until you're looking at the tip of your finger. Now you're seeing the tip of your finger. Which way is your finger going now?
Anti-clockwise.
Right. Now don't do anything. Keep spinning your plate. Bring it back up. And now just look underneath the plate. Which way is your finger going?
It's the opposite direction.
Let's go look. Put it above you. Put your finger above you. Now it's going clockwise.
Yeah.
Now you bring it back down. It's going counterclockwise. All you're changing is how you're seeing it.
Yeah.
Perspective. Energy is that too.
Right.
It's how we see things.
Yes.
How we view things. So.
And is it part of that recognizing the vibration part, linking back to what we were talking about before with breathing and gratitude, of recognizing that the energy that we're putting out there, what we're giving out, may not be necessarily the good thing because we're not in a good state of mind, and therefore that energy is being put out, and then it's to shift that energy is to then go back to that breathing and gratitude. Is that steps that?
Yes, breath and gratitude. Yeah, even if we pause for a moment right now, all of us, just for a quick moment, think about someone you're really grateful for.
Yeah.
Look at your face. You just lit up, right? You can't think about what you're not grateful for when you're thinking about what you're grateful for.
Yeah.
That's the energy shift right there. And if I think about my mom and all that stuff that happened, and I go, wow, that was intense stuff, and I can immediately feel myself, even though I've done all this work. And then I think about, oh my God, like my daughter and all the things, right? We really have to pay attention to our thoughts. Our thoughts drive us if we don't drive them. And the brain needs something to do. So that's a lot of the work of transformation and personal development, is training our brains to work for us and not just allowing them to be on this thing all by itself.
Okay. So step 6 is adversity and transformation. I guess this is the tough part that we're getting to. This is not going to be okay. Everything's not going to be on cloud nine. We've got to go through some transformation, some issues, and then we've got to learn by the sounds of it. If I understand that correctly, can you talk about
Yes.
adversity and transformation, please?
Yes, it's the big one. It's the thing that we all have in common, that we all know about, which is pain and anguish and despair and trauma and feeling and experiencing things we don't want to, that we wish we never had, that then are part of us.
Right.
And then we're stuck with, how do we deal with it? This is a part of us. And often it's the thing we think about and focus on the most because it hurts and it didn't feel good. And what I've really decided at one point in life was that I just wanted to feel better. I really wanted to feel peace. And I wasn't sure how to do that and how to have that come about for a while. It really took me a while. And when I really discovered it was in the giving, it was in the service to those, anyone that needed it. That's where my peace came. It was that we all go through adversity, and for lack of a better word, it's really hard and it sucks. It's the thing that makes us question why we're here. And if we can choose to do that work, whether you find someone, I want to say, don't do that work alone necessarily. So there's shadow work that you can do alone to really dive into some of your own understandings of your own psychology, and you can do with a guide. That work is okay to do alone. That deep trauma work, don't do alone. Have someone do that with you, ideally a professional, a good friend who really has only your best interests at heart. But do the work. Find a therapist. Find whatever kind of therapist works for you. It could be so many different ways that happens, but do the work. Be willing to dive into the darkness, because when you make friends with your demons, what happens is they give you power to really live. And that's what I want people to know, is that your power lives in your willingness to make friends with your demons, to sit with them, to understand them, to know what they need so that they can actually disperse, right? To really understand that need. Because I have abandonment issues from my life and adversity, it's something that I contend with in my personal relationship, right, with my significant other. And it's nothing he ever does wrong. And this is something I want people to hear. No matter where we are in life, no matter how much work we've done, our stuff shows up. It just does, right? It's how well versed are we to use our tools, to understand ourselves, to be able to be with grace in that moment, right, in those situations. And one of the things that recently I've had to learn is, how do I feel good in quiet, right, from my significant other, who we live far away from each other. So it's like, how am I okay in quiet? And I had to really it was the sweetest thing he ever said to me. And I was like, and we giggle about it now, but he said, it's so interesting that your little girl had it, that if I'm quiet for a little bit, my love went away. And I was like, oh, The moment he acknowledged what I didn't know was even true for me,
Yeah.
it just went away. And I was like, oh my God, like that's all I needed to hear all those years, right? But it's that it just went away because he saw it, he knew it, he acknowledged it. It's my deep, dark stuff.
Yeah.
But wow. So it's our willingness to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? To be vulnerable with ourselves and with others, right? It's all of that. We look at it as adversity as awful, and it is. And it's also beautiful because it teaches us so much of who we are
Yes.
if we're willing to do the work and be held while we're doing it.
Does that connect to when we talk about adversity in a way of reframing that? Um, One of my favorite quotes is from Shakespeare in Hamlet, where it talk about, nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so. So when we think about adversity, a lot of the times we're thinking of it as a bad thing, and then we've got to, because we're giving a label of being good or bad, we've got to work through that, and that becomes difficult. But if we just treat it as an event, and my interpretation of that event is what gives it meaning, that makes
Yes.
overcoming that adversity easier. Is that
Much easier. It doesn't take the pain away,
that's a different thing? Yeah,
but so it doesn't take the pain away,
yeah,
and it does make it easier. And one of the things you're getting to is really important. I think it's a very important distinction too that we share with people is that we're meaning making machines.
yes,
We are, right? We make
yeah,
meaning out of everything, right? And
right,
whether we need to or not.
yeah,
And that's a good thing. And it also can hinder us. And so being aware that we're meaning making machines and it's what we make it mean.
yeah,
So resiliency is something that comes up a lot. And I think about as we're meaning making machines and adversity. And there is science behind resiliency, and there are resiliency factors that different people have some little bit more resiliency in them than others. However,
yeah,
we have to really honor that there isn't a good or a bad necessarily. It is the what is.
yeah,
And now that it's what is, and that what is within us and of us, we now are responsible.
yes,
This is the part that people sometimes have a hard time with,
mhm,
which is no, you're not responsible for what happened to you at all.
yeah,
You are, as a grown up, responsible if you desire to feel better, to help yourself feel better and do that work.
yeah,
No one can do that for you. My real father is alive, and I live with him, and I love him very much. And we had to do a bunch of reconnecting, and I had to do a lot of forgiving,
yeah,
right? And it's all okay. And some people say to me, how can you? And I say, how can I not? There's not, my father's a survivor of the Holocaust.
mhm,
He did what he knew was best with the tools he had.
yeah,
It's the same for all of us. So it's not when we can take that kind of intensity out of our interpersonal family relationships that don't involve deep harm and deep trauma to children. I want to be very clear, like
mm,
sexual harm and harm to children like that. I'm not talking about anything like that.
mm,
I'm talking about our interpersonal relationships,
yeah,
and speaking and communicating. There's different kinds of harm and trauma in there that people really need professionals to work through that with them to help them feel safe and to understand that depth. And I make that distinction and I make it clearly because I never want someone leaving this kind of conversation thinking in any way, shape, or form that they are ever responsible
mm,
for anyone doing something to them. They
yeah,
are not. And
right,
that's really important to me. And from the bottom of my heart, I don't want, there's a big spiritual conversation out there that we draw these experiences to us to create. No, no,
sometimes shit
no.
happens.
Not true. You
Yeah,
didn't. It's not your fault. Now that it's happened and it's bothering you, now, yes, you need to work through it.
yeah.
There's a gift of adversity.
An interesting point you mentioned there about your father, which I think is really important to forgiving yourself as well, because you mentioned he did the best he knew how with what he had.
Yeah.
And I think what is also might be important for people listening is to remember that, if you're that in any given moment you've done the best that you could at that point in time. We can all look back with 2020 and go, I should have done something else. But in that moment, no matter what your experience is, I mean, that must have been, like, from your perspective as well, in with your father, being able to go to recognize that in him. Is that a key step to that forgiveness?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And that we're all human. You know, um, I think we forget that we're all human and we're all experiencing different things and the same things, right? And that we all come from places that hurt, and we also come from places of joy. And so
Yeah.
when we can remember that we're all human beings,
Yeah.
with the caveat aside from those that cause serious harm to people, doing the best we can to walk this earth together,
Mm.
I want to honor that for others. No one's perfect. I'm not perfect. He's not perfect. No one, my daughter's not perfect. No one is, right? And so allowing ourselves to be perfectly imperfect
Yeah.
creates more compassion in the space, more forgiveness in the space, more understanding in the space.
Which that sounds like it leads into the seventh point, which is creating a conscious and compassionate world. Um,
Yes.
have I
Yes.
got that right? Yeah.
That right there, you got it. That is the layup. The more that we're aware of ourselves and our meaning making tendencies, the
Yeah.
more we can create a conscious, compassionate world. The more compassion I have for myself, my
Yeah.
experiences, what I've done wrong, what I'm upset with myself for, the more compassion I have for you,
Yeah.
right? And it's that domino effect. And it begins with us. It really does. You know, people laugh when Dalai Lama says, and this where it begins within. It does, right? It begins within. Anything, any change you want to see outside of you, start here. And that's where you're going to start to actually experience it. When you shift, when you're more open to love,
Mm.
more love will appear. You
Yeah.
know, stay open. That's one of the things I want to say to people. Stay open. Stay open to love. Stay and love, whether it's, I don't mean romantic love. I mean stay open to love.
Yeah.
Right? Love comes in so many different forms, and those are the ways in which we don't feel alone.
Yeah.
When we're in spaces and we're open to love, we find there are other people that are open to love as well.
It sounds like what you're saying there, because a lot of people go, if only I had this or I only had that, my life would be okay. But really, what you sound like you're saying is that you've got to flip it. It's got to be, when you're okay or when you've got it right in here, then it's going to be, those things will come to you. Like you mentioned about money before. You talk about that, and it sounds like, from that perspective, you were, your version of success didn't involve the money. You weren't ready to have that level of security. But then when you went through the process, the adversity, then you made a shift. Am I understanding that correctly? And then that money side of things took care of itself.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. Yep. And when I stopped, here's one of the tricks, and I'm going to try to see if you guys, people can see it. So there's an energy, right? We're talking energy. Everything is energy. So if I am going after something, what am I doing?
Yeah, you're pushing it away.
Pushing it away. If I am open to something and doing my work with it, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I'm allowing it in, right? So when I'm wanting something, I'm going after it, and I'm really hungry for it, I'm actually contracted,
Yeah.
right? I'm actually contracted because I'm in all this stuff around it. But when I'm in the allowing and the flow energy, it flows. That's the difference.
Yeah, I'm a racing fan, so I'm taking that terminology as like when you're chasing something, you're creating the bubble, the draft bubble, and you're pushing the car in front of you further away. But what you really,
Exactly. But when you're in the bubble with the car in front of you or the truck in front of you, then it pulls you with it, and that flow is there. Yes, I know it well.
so this creating the conscious and compassionate world, is that like once you go through this process of receptivity and tension, so you're really paying attention to what it is that's important to you, and then once you understand what that is, it's projecting that out. Am I understanding that?
Yeah.
Is that the conscious part where you're going, okay, this is what I want, so yeah.
Yes, and notice that the conscious, compassionate world is coming out of adversity.
Yeah.
Right? Because once we can realize that everyone experiences it. We are not alone.
Yeah.
Right there, right? So it's literally, it comes right off of adversity of, wow, we're not alone. Everyone experiences adversity in some intense way or another. Thus, my compassion for you has expanded. And we step into a conscious, compassionate world where step 8, we can create love for all, because that's the ultimate gift, right? Which is really that God energy that many people talk of, that all energy, I call the religions many rivers that lead to the same source. Right? It's like all these different ways of being, and then doctrines of saying you should be this way or this way, but really they're, if you wipe away all the baloney and all their rules and all their stuff, they're all really talking about love and acceptance, right? And coming to that space. Forgiveness is a big part of it. They talk about forgiveness, gratitude, love, acceptance. The field. Jesus talks about the field, right? Give me all of your possessions and you shall have that golden field. Was he really talking about that field, a physical field, or was he talking about an energetic field, right? Buddha, what was Buddha talking about? Okay, so it's when we really look at that, it's that source, that energy, that love coming out of understanding we're all the same. We all experience life, adversity, joy, love, grace, peace. Once we understand that, that's the beginning of a conscious, compassionate world that I care about me, I care about you. Right? And then that brings us into that if we have that, we all can really understand that it's about love. It's about love for self, for others, and the planet we live on.
Yeah. And the love component, I noticed as you were talking through each of those steps, it's underlying all of them, the gratitude, the giving, the love is that component, and the love for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No matter what. And I want to bring to that people will say, oh, I don't love myself, but I love my grandchild, like, or I love this person, I love that. And what I want to say is, of course you love yourself. You wouldn't have the ability to connect to that love if you didn't have love yourself, right? And people somehow miss that. It's great to love yourself. It's not egoistic. It's not selfish. It's what allows you to connect to everyone else and to everything else.
It's an interesting point you mentioned there, because a lot of people experience that where they're taught, to love, but not love. To love yourself is like it's not right. Which is I'm curious to know where that originated from. I'm still trying to work that one out, but it's almost like if you love yourself, that's wrong, and then it's like, but that's, you can only give what you have for yourself in any.
Exactly. You can only give what you already embody.
Yeah.
And so embody love, because the more of that you embody, the better you feel and the more you have to share, right? And it is so funny how we say, don't love yourself. It's the part that the distinction that I want to create for people is that people mix it with greed.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's not greed. Loving yourself is not greed. It's not greedy. It's not anything like that. It's a very different energy and it's a very different conversation. So if we can learn to separate those two,
Yes.
right, then we can understand. But I think that's where they get mixed up, right? If I love myself, then everything I do is going to be only for me, me first, me first, me first, me first. That's greedy. That's different. Right.
Yes.
And so, and I want us to be able to separate those. And I think that's where it gets mixed up very easily, and within all the religious doctrines and the different ways in which they play out in humanity.
And isn't that, I mean, from that perspective, we're going, okay, when you love yourself, you recognize that you are enough and there is enough in the world, so you're okay to share that, and hence the giving.
Yes, exactly. It's the same conversation of my dear friend Maria Simone says to me all the time. She's a money coach, and she says, the money hasn't left the planet. It's everywhere. The money doesn't leave. It just keeps moving around. It's like the same with love. The love isn't left. It's everywhere. It's always ever present, right?
Yes.
It hasn't left the planet. It hasn't left us. It's the connecting to it. And that starts with loving yourself, with self-care, with taking that moment to breathe, with taking that hot bath, taking the walk that you need.
All right, we're starting to run out of, well, I think we've gone over time, but um, if people are going to reach you, I mean, what's the best way to reach you? And I noticed on your website, you've got a number of different programs. You've got a get to know you program, which is a 90-minute program. There's a longer one. This is the time to tell people about, how to contact you and the things that you offer and how you can help them. So I'll let
Thank
you
you
go.
so much for that. And thank you for this time and for everyone who's joined us. This has really been a treat. I love these conversations. And with you specifically, you brought out some things in me that I don't often share. And I really appreciate that. That's really nice. And thank you for that.
Well, thank you for sharing it.
So you can find me two places, discoverthegift.com. You can rent the movie there. And if you're a Gaia member, you can also get it for free on Gaia if you already paid that. There are my global distributors. But if you go to discoverthegift.com, you can get the movie there. And then on a living curriculum, which is the work that I do, which is living, right? And how do we live day to day and live a life we love ideally and feel good about it? You'll find all the links to Discover the Gift in the book and also to myself. And you can work with me in many different ways. You can work with me one-on-one. You can work with me in small groups. And coming up, not this winter, but this coming spring, we will have our 11th life coaching certification program happening.
Wow.
So about April or May coming up. I'm working on my final details of that in 2023. So that will be really nice. And I'm here and I'm available. And this work is why I'm here. And it's to help you grow, discover your gifts, and feel good about the life you're living in each moment.
Okay, so the best way to reach you is via your website, and the contact details are on your website.
Yep. And Cheyenne at discoverthegift.com. And you can also feel free to call me. You can always leave a message. It's my business phone. I'm happy to give that out. If you guys want that number, it's 323-889-9512. And feel free to text or call.
And if someone's ringing from international, that you're in America, so that'll be +1 at the start.
Yes, that'll be +1. Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. So there, Cheyenne, it's been absolutely amazing having you on the show. Listeners, please do reach out to Cheyenne. She's just I'm stuck for words. I'm not often stuck for words, as my friends will tell me, but I've been blown away listening to you. I love the movie. Watch the movie. Please watch the movie. It's really inspiring, and the book is just as inspiring as well. Thank you very much for being on the show. Is there some last couple of points you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yes, and thank you all for having me. Thank you for having me. And the curriculum really is watch the movie, read the book, and watch the movie again, because there's something in it no matter where you're at in life. There's something there for you to have an aha moment about yourself and your next steps. Thank you, everyone. Discover the gift.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.